We might as well start from the beginning.
Sure.
Well, my dad was a vaudevillian comic and worked with a guy named Herb Williams, and a very funny guy. And one of his buddies, a guy, Bob Pierce, later wound up in Rochester, New York, where we lived. And Bob had a radio show, a kid show on Saturdays. And my dad said, hey, I got somebody for you. So I auditioned for Bob Pierce, and Bob hired me. And actually, the radio show was called Uncle Bob Pierce and His Talking Dog Bozo. And then when I came on board, it became Uncle Bob Pierce and Company and His Talking Dog Bozo. So I actually got top billing over the dog. So that was good. Well, from there, I stayed in the radio for a while and was the class clown in school. And finally, in 1938, I guess it was, my father passed away, and my mother and I moved to New York City, where we were originally from. And I wanted to go to New York because I wanted to get in the business by then. And I met a guy named Murray Davison. We called Duke Murray, had a band in New York, and we became close friends. And I was the comic with his band, and we did club dates all over New York City.
Mm-hmm. Now, what were you involved in just at the onset of World War II in 38, 39? This is when you were doing your clubs?
Well, yeah, actually World War II hadn't started yet. In 1939, we were doing gigs all over New York, as I said. And then in 1941, we got a gig in Dayton, Ohio. And it was for the French Village, a joint there. And Duke and his band had a 6-piece jump band. Duke would play, and I was the comic with the band, and we all traveled to Dayton, Ohio. Unbeknownst to us, Patterson Field. In those days, it was Patterson Field. Today, it's Wright-Patterson Field. And Patterson Field was the Army Air Corps base then. So we did the gig, and the band, the big swing band, and a lot of the bases around the country at that time, even before the war, had their own swing bands, you know, their own big bands. And the guys from the big band would come down to the French Village and watch our guys play. They loved the jazz, and talked our guitar man into staying behind, getting his release from the draft board, because we all had to sign up at that point, 1941. And joining the Army Air Corps, and get him in. The guy who was in charge of the band said, we'll get you in the band, and you'll have a ball. And that's what Larry did, our guitar man. So we went back to New York, the rest of us, and without a thought about war. We knew it was, you know, the war clouds around the horizon, and Hitler was going into Poland and all these. And suddenly, now we are December 7th, and I'm sitting in my apartment in New York and listening to WNEW Martin Block, who was the big music guy in those days, and his make-believe ballroom. And all of a sudden the announcer broke in and said that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. And so all of us guys got together and wondered what we should do. Well, it wasn't until 1942, actually, that we decided we better do something about this, and because we're going to be drafted anyway. So we got into Larry's outfit in Patterson Field, and that's when Duke and I, my buddy Duke, Murray Davison, and I moved to Patterson Field and got in with the Army Air Corps.
And that was with the band?
And no, actually it wasn't. Larry then became the first sergeant of a brand new outfit, a 9th Air Corps outfit, and we got in with him, and I became a supply sergeant, and Duke became, I think he was in the control room. He was a clerk, and finally we got on the ship. We were all destined to go overseas to North Africa, and we got on this the USS West Point, which is one of the largest troop ships in the war at that time. This is early in 1942, and we set sail for North Africa. And on board ship, there were 8,000 of us on board ship. And Duke and I decided, this is ridiculous. We're not soldiers, we're entertainers. So we asked to see General Brereton, who was the head of the 9th Air Force, and told him that. And Brereton said, not a bad idea. We said we should do a show on board ship because the morale stunk. We were on board this ship for 30 days before we landed in India. And during that most of that time, we did about 3-4 shows a day for the troops. They loved it. We brought music. What we did was put out a call to the ship. 8,000 troops. There were bound to be musicians and comics and so on. I got 2 other comics, and so that's what we did on the ship going over. When we landed in Egypt, we wound up in Cairo. That's where the general said to Duke and me, "You guys did a terrific job. We want you in special services. We want you to put together a show, and your job will be to entertain the troops as they go in and out of battle." So that's what happened.
So now we all hear today about entertainers that are going to Afghanistan, they're going to Iraq, entertaining the troops.
Right.
Most everybody who's 25 or older has either seen or seen footage of Bob Hope entertaining troops all around the world. But prior to talking to you, I was never aware that there were servicemen who had their own entertainment functions in the Army, Air Force, whatnot,
Right.
that very few people know about, and that's how you got involved there in
Exactly.
Cairo.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how that started.
Well, that's the thing that we've got to distinguish between the USO, and they were the civilian performers that went over and are doing it now too, and entertained the troops in all the various venues in the Pacific and in European theater and so on. And the guys who were actually with the forces, in the armed forces, like we were, that were put into special service units, entertainment units, that were sent out to entertain the troops. So actually, we were overseas. We were in the thick of the battle. We were called Combat Entertainment Unit. And the other guys, the USO guys, would come over for a week or so and then go back home again. And so what happens then is that our troop began in Cairo. We got together a show. There were 15 of us. There was a 6-piece band. There were 3 comics. There were singers. There were piano players. There were 15 of us made up the entertainment unit. And we did burlesque and vaudeville skits, the comics did. We did a strange dance. It was a terrific show. And then, of course, we presented all the music of the day, the great music that you heard from World War II. That brought back memories for the guys who were going into battle. So, for example, in North Africa, where we started our tour, on the way up through Cairo, Benghazi, Tripoli, all the way up to Tripoli and back again, we entertained all kinds of troops. Now, in the early days, in 1942, there weren't too many American troops in North Africa. It was mostly British. And so we played for the British troops in Al Alamein when they fought the Desert Fox at Rommel, and we played Tobruk, which had been the site of serious battles with the Nazis and the British. And I've got to tell you an interesting story that happened. We had given to us, incidentally, a big painted yellow bus with the Special Services unit on the side. We called ourselves the Sky Blazers. And there's a picture of it that you can take a peek at now. And that's how we traveled. And we had a big 6x6 truck that carried all our props and costumes and musical instruments. And these 2 vehicles in convoy is how we got around on the bombed out roads and through these terrible battles and so on. We were on our way to Tripoli at one point, and riding in the bus, and the roads are miserable, and there are all kinds of trucks that are disabled and planes that are still burning on the side of the road. And all of a sudden we looked ahead of us, and there were 25 or 30 enemy troops with guns drawn, Italian troops. And they stopped our bus. And we thought, my God, what's going on here? So Panici, who was our clarinet man, said, I speak Italian. Why don't I go out and find out what's going on? We sent him out there. Panici is in a big conversation with one of the guys, looked like the sergeant of the group, comes back in the bus, and he's got this worried frown on his face. We thought, my God, they've taken us prisoner. Well, what Panici said was, he burst out laughing. He said, they're actually Italian troops. They're fed up with the war, and they decided to surrender to us. So we became then the first American entertainers to capture enemy troops. So what we did was have them take their guns, rifles, put them in the back of the truck, and march behind us. And we took off in a convoy, singing "Off We Go into the Wild Blue Yonder," and dropped them off at the nearest British camp. So that was one of the crazy things that happened. When we were in Cairo, as a matter of fact, we played for King Farouk. We did a lot of shows around Cairo and Alexandria to get the show ready to go out on the road. And one of the strange things that happened was a gig for King Farouk, who was the king of Egypt at that point, at his palace, at the palace. And the Red Cross guy, the head of the Red Cross, said, "We got a gig for you at the palace." And Duke and I, as performers, playing the palace is the big thing. Well, it happened to be King Farouk's palace. And they had set up a big area behind the palace for a party. And it went on all night. And when we came into this tent area, Samia Gamal and her belly dancers were there. It was quite a show. King Farouk and the whole entourage who came to the party, viewers, sat by the swimming pool and on cushions. And there was a dance floor off to our right where Duke and the boys played. And then there was a big stage area where all the tribes from all over Africa entertained the king all night long. And Queen Farida, incidentally, was his new bride. And then Solomon Pasha, who was the prime minister of Egypt at that point, came up to me. I acted as the band leader then. Said, "Do you gentlemen know the Egyptian national anthem?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but I'll ask Duke." So I asked Duke, I said, "Do you know the Egyptian national?" He said, "Of course." I said, "How do you know the Egyptian national anthem?" He said, "We've heard it in the movie houses." And I said, "Okay." So I talked to Solomon Pasha and I said, "Yeah, the guys know it." He said, "All right, when the king comes in, I want you guys to start playing. I will point to you, you point to the band, and that's their cue to start playing the national anthem." So we waited. What he didn't do was to tell us that there was a middle part to be played only when the king is present. That part we didn't know about. So anyway, Duke and the guys are standing by, and I'm watching Solomon Pasha, and all of a sudden there's a big turmoil over at the entrance, and in comes the king and the queen and the party, and it looked like one of these comedy movies, in the old days, like a Groucho Marx movie. And they all came in, and Duke starts up with this little six-piece jazz band, which was the Egyptian national anthem. Well, the king and the court all snap to attention. Duke finishes, and the king's waiting for the middle part. And Duke doesn't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. So Duke turns to the band as the king is about to step off, figuring they don't know the middle part. Duke turns to the band and says, "I guess it isn't long enough. One more time." And he strikes up. Well, the king snaps to attention. The court all snapped to attention. They finish the second time. Now the king is thoroughly confused. He doesn't know what to do. And Duke is confused. And Solomon Pasha is standing there biting his nails. And Duke says, in his best Count Basie imitation, "One more time." Well, the king starts out, and the court, the whole party starts out walking. Duke strikes up the band the third time, and the king snaps to attention. Everybody falls over everybody else. It's quite a scene. Solomon Pasha runs over to us and says, "Stop! For heaven's sake, stop! In the name of Allah, stop!" Well, so we almost created an international incident by screwing up the Egyptian national anthem. So that was quite a story.
Now, I read something also that there was a large tent.
Yeah, right.
This is performed.
That's where we performed it.
And I read a story about you're making a comment about the size of the tent.
Yeah.
Do you recall?
It was like the size of 3 football fields laid end to end. It wasn't quite that big, but it looked like that. And as you came in, there was a desert scene with Bedouin Arabs with camels and tents, and they were roasting a kid on a spit and playing the instruments. And then you walk through, and there was the big Olympic-sized swimming pool, and with boats in the pool, with the Samia Gamal girls, the belly dancers, posed in the boats, and and then the wall behind that, they had built a wall with a niche in it, was the Bronze Man. I can't remember his name now, something Khan, the Bronze Man, who was all bronzed and acted like a statue, would pose and then turn suddenly, and you'd see the statue move. He was painted entirely in gold. And then all around the perimeter of this thing, the stage that I told you about where the tribes would entertain later, the RAF band was down at the other end. It was a huge tent. And all around the perimeter were food, all kinds of food, delicious delicacies I can't even begin to describe. And what we had done, Duke decided that we're going to get some stuff from the table and take it home. And so he would take a fork or a plate or something, put it in his trumpet case, and the guys followed suit. And but it was quite an evening, and we couldn't get near the king. Incidentally, they wouldn't let us near the king. But yeah, that was the size and the scope of the tent that we had.
I remember there's a quote in there, one of the articles that you had mentioned that it was so big that you thought that they had shot down 3 German bombers the day before.
Yeah,
as they flew through the tent.
Exactly, to make room for the tent. But those are little quotes that I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure I said it. But yeah, it was quite a deal. So we went all through North Africa then, and then finally we were told when we reached Tripoli in that area that the 9th Air Force, something was going to happen with the 9th Air Force, that we should come back again. On the way back, we played Benghazi, where the bomb group that bombed the Polesti oil fields in Romania were. And we didn't know that was about to happen. And we did a show for the guys that night. The next morning they were on the line. The bombers took off for the Ploesti oil fields. And that's when we found out what was going on. And later that day, they came in all shot to hell, and the planes were cracking up on the field. It was a terrible devastation. And they did accomplish about 40 or 50% of the mission, but the Germans built up the oil fields again, which was kind of sad. That happened.
And that's one of the things that struck me in going through some of the articles and the treatment.
Yeah.
In the difference between the USO shows and your shows was you sometimes had to run for cover.
Oh, absolutely.
During your shows.
Every night. When they bombed, we would be in the middle of a show or something. Everybody would dive in a ditch or in just to get away from the bombing. The bombing itself was pretty bad, but the worst part was the shrapnel from the bombs that fell and all around you. And I almost got hit one night. This was not later in France, but yeah, it was pretty devastating. And my first experience with bombs being dropped from an airplane on me, because that's what they were doing. They aimed their sights on me. Thank God I got out of it, but a lot of guys didn't, obviously. It was pretty terrifying. So that's what happened. We went through the North African campaign. We were brought back to Cairo, and at that point they said that we were to move we didn't know where, but we were to get on a ship and be moved. Well, we found out we were going to England, and that's where we wound up.
Now, before we leave Cairo, I got to ask you a question about
Sure.
something else that I saw in one of the articles was the group's meeting with Princess Pat of Greece.
Oh yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
What happened was the head of the Red Cross in Cairo and Alexandria in the Middle East. I can't remember his name. He was a nice young man, and he actually took us under his wing and got us a lot of these gigs that we did, like for King Farouk, and played Ewart Hall. We played the Opera House, did a Royal Command performance for King Farouk. And one of the gigs that he set us up with was Prince Peter and his wife of Greece. They had a home in Alexandria. And we had a guy that was with the troop, a sergeant, who was a real tough guy from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, who I'm sure was in the mob before he joined. He was an old Army man, transferred into the Army Air Corps. But he was the best scrounger in the world. So he traveled with us, and he got us whatever we wanted. But his one passion was to play an instrument and be in a band, because he thought he could pick up a lot of women that way. Well, Duke and I decided what we were going to do for this kid, because he was so terrific to us, was teach him how to fake playing a bass, the stand-up bass. Mm-hmm. And then he could go along with us on some of these gigs and act like he's playing bass. The problem was that he was a lush. I mean, really. Well, we got into Prince Peter's house, this big mansion in Alexandria. It was a beautiful party. And we were on the dance floor, and the guys are all on the stage, ready to play. And they made the mistake of putting a table full of liquor in the back of my friend, the bass player. Well, he proceeded to get loaded. Now, at the break, we all went for food. Now, I act like I was not a musician, but whenever we had stuff like that, parties or anything like that, I went along as the manager of the band, because I didn't want to miss out on these great things. The rest of the comics stayed home. But anyway, this guy goes in woozily, walks into where they're serving this delicious food, picks up 2 platefuls, and is walking across the dance floor, and he slips. And feet come out from under it. He takes the 2 plates and happens to hit an old dowager who's standing on the dance floor right here. And down he goes, and she screams. Everybody in the dance floor screams. Well, instead of this idiot getting up and calmly walking away or trying to sneak away, he gets down on his hands and knees and starts cleaning up the mess and saying, "That was a hell of a step, that last one was. I don't know." Anyway, we got him the heck out of there fast. So that was our experience with Prince Peter.
And I remember there was at some point you were about to meet. I think it was Princess Pat, and no one knew what to do.
Yeah, I don't remember that incident, but yeah.
According to one of the articles I was reading, everybody was not sure to shake hands,
or curtsy.
And she came in and said, "Hiya, fellas, what's cooking?"
That's it, exactly. I'd forgotten that. Yeah, that's what she said. We didn't know what to do. Should we, be formal? Should we bow? Should we kiss her hand? And she came in and said, "Hi, fellas, how you doing?" And that broke the ice. And she was terrific. Mm-hmm. And I have a souvenir cup from their house too that I'll show you later. Okay, so that was our time. And yes.
Now, and I'm not sure if this was at the same time, but you also performed for the Zulu Warriors.
Oh yeah, we did that for the South Africans, the Zulu Warriors. I forgot about that. This was in our early time, going up toward Tobruk and Benghazi, and we stopped off at a South African camp, and they didn't tell us who we were doing a show for. And so we were in this little area. The stage faced an open field, and we didn't know who the audience was. And the officers, the South Africans, didn't tell us. They wanted to surprise us. So when we opened up these big doors, walked out on stage, there was no curtain. We stopped and gasped because our audience were 5,000 Zulu warriors in full costume that were brought over to fight in World War II. So we decided, they don't speak English, what are we going to do with the comedy bits? They were out. So we decided just to have some fun. So the band played, and they loved the music. And we did our funny comedy bits. We spit water on each other. We did the comedy dance that we do. We fell down. We did pratfalls. And they all screamed. All of a sudden, at the end of the show, they all started to hiss. And that we heard this from 5,000 troops. Sss, sss. And we thought, my God, were we that bad? They're hissing us? And all of a sudden, the chief with a spear jumps up on the stage. We all stood back, and we thought he was going to kill us. And he turned around and he talked to the troops, to his people out there. And at that point, one of I guess he was a captain, the South African guy, said, that's their sign of approval when they hissed you. So don't worry about it. He's telling everybody now how much they enjoyed us being there and thanking us very much for being there and putting on a show for them. And later in Downbeat magazine, which is the magazine for jazz, there was a big write-up about us there, and I've got an article or a picture of us, the troupe that you can see in that.
Now there was also another an article, and I'm not sure if this is the same time frame or not, but when you and I believe Duke and Tex and one other fellow went down to the River Styx.
Oh yeah, there were four of us. It was one of the comics, Jack Wolf.
Right.
And Jack was a character. He was from Chicago, very funny guy, and myself. And he talked us into going down into this cave, and I forget exactly where we were. It was somewhere, and I don't have the location at that point. But there was an article about us that I have. What they had done years ago was planted, and I think his name was Bilbo. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look at the article again. But anyway, there were two rafts down there, and it was a river, and as you propelled yourself across the river, and then you lay down on your back and pushed yourself under this cliff, you came out into a huge cavern, there spotlights and searchlights and all kinds of lighting equipment was stored. And I think it had to do with World War I, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, we'd heard about that from the natives around there, and we decided we could use a couple of roving spots or something like that. We could find something. So let's go down and look at it. So four of us got on these two rafts. One of them held three of us, the other one held one guy. And the light that we had, the flashlights, couldn't penetrate. It was so vast in there, and so black was the water that the flashlights weren't any good. We took along gasoline torches, and three of us on this one raft, and right in the middle of this lake that we were on, we decided we would light up the gasoline to see where we were. And we lighted up these torches, and while we're looking around in awe of where we were, suddenly we felt wet. It wasn't water, it was gasoline that spilled. And the torches caught the gas on fire. It exploded. The three of us went into the river. Tex was on the other raft. He was the one that pulled up. And the sad thing was that Wolf, the comic, couldn't swim. Well, we grabbed him and held him up, and the fire was on the water coming toward us, and we had to push that fire away from us, keep Wolf up, and Duke and me, and then we got to Tex's raft. We hung onto that. He had like a board that he paddled with, and we got off on shore. And it seemed like we were in there for a half an hour. Well, it was like 5 minutes, a couple of minutes. And we found out later that that was the mythical river, they say it was the entrance to hell, to Hades, the mythical river Styx that we were on. And they did a big article about us there. One thing that I forgot to tell you about in North Africa was when we were in El Alamein, and we found a camera. And one of the guys, I don't know where we were, where we had the film processed, later on I think it was, and it was a picture of Rommel drinking champagne and saluting his troops. One of the pictures is a copy of one of the photos, and the other one is the original photo, which really needs to be restored a little. But it's quite exciting to think that we have these original pictures of Rommel in El Alamein. When we were in Tobruk, it was now being held by the British Navy, and a salvage crew was there because the Nazis had come and had the town. Then the British took it away from them. The Nazis came about 3 or 4 times. It changed hands. Now the British have them. The British Navy salvage troop is salvaging ships that are in the bottom of the harbor and trying to get the bodies out and everything. And I came along. We had done a show for them and watched them work. And the head guy there, whatever his title was, said, "Hey Yank, would you like to go deep sea diving?" I said, "Sure," like an idiot. So they put me in the hard hat and the suit. and it was about 40 feet under, and gave me instructions about what I was to do when I went under there. One of the things was you're going to breathe heavily. They had an old-fashioned hand-pumped gizmo that pumped the air into the helmet that I was to breathe. And if these guys stopped pumping, I had about 5 minutes left of air in there that I'd be all right and come up to the surface with. Here's your lifeline. Don't let anything happen to the air hose. Inside your helmet is a little lever, and if your faceplate fogs up, you hit the lever, take the seawater in your mouth and spit on that, and it'll clear it up, just like you do with scuba diving. But be careful that doesn't stick, because if it is, your helmet will fill up with water, and you know what happens to you. And then there's a little lever here. The pressure will be fierce on you. Turn that lever. If you turn it too far, your suit will blow up, and you'll come right up to the surface. So with all those instructions in mind, I get on, I go under, and I free fall down to the 40 feet, 30, 40 feet, whatever it was, to the bottom. And then I start walking. And you know the slow motion walk that you have when you're weighted down with a belt and with the booties, they call them, the heavy shoes. And walked over, and I noticed a ship with a big jagged hole that was blown in it. And I thought I'm going to go inside and look. But then I decided, wait a minute, if my air hose gets hooked on that piece of metal, it could cut through the air hose. But I stuck my head in there anyway. I came out. I had to climb up a little bit on the ship to look inside. Then I thought of maybe there's some bodies or something in there. I got back down, and something hit me in the back of the head. And I thought, oh my God, I thought of like an arm or a leg. And now I'm breathing heavily, and my faceplate is fogging up. I reach down, and I hit the lever, get in some seawater, spit on the thing, it clears it up, and it's a fish that swims by. But then I started thinking, what have I done? I took in the water. What if it was a body part? And I started to gag in the suit, and I thought, I can't do that. All of a sudden, I heard hissing sound, and it was my air hose that caught on the piece of jagged metal, and it was just cut. I tried the lifeline. It was stuck. I didn't know what to do. I finally took the weight off of me, made my way up the hull a little bit, unloosened the line, and then got the bright idea. I turned the lever and blew up the suit and got to the surface immediately, and there's where they grabbed me and saved me. I could have died down there in Tobruk, in the bottom of the sea there.
And instead you ended up doing an imitation of the Michelin Man.
Yeah, right, exactly. It was a scary day, but it was quite an experience. One that I'll never duplicate again. That was our tenure. We went through a lot of experiences in North Africa, and a lot of bombings and a lot of strafings, and it was pretty bad. We finally got on the ship, headed for England, and when we got to England, what happened was that we were still in our summer uniforms, and we came into England in February, and it was freezing cold, and I came down with influenza. Actually the World War I influenza. I almost died in the hospital there. And finally I became well, and we all got together again, and we played all through England. And it was there that we did a lot of wonderful things. We played for a lot of American troops who were there, B-17 bomb groups, the British. We did a couple of things. One was for the Aid to Russia ball Churchill had put on. And that was the deal. It was the Royal Air Force Band and the Sky Blazers. Mm-hmm. And that was quite a gig.
Okay. And you also you played a lot for children's.
Yeah, we did. Christmas time then. It became Christmas time, and we'd been over for a couple of years now. And we played, we were stationed in oh, my mind. I'm having a senior moment. We were stationed in Windsor, where Windsor Castle is. Mm-hmm. And while there, the lieutenant, we had a lieutenant with us. The sergeant had left us in North Africa. We got a lieutenant who was with us. It was a Hollywood scriptwriter before the war. And he was a terrific guy, Bud Bankson. And he said he had a gig for us to play for the blind kids of Windsor, the School for the Blind. And so we decided we would do that, absolutely. And our big rotund singer, who was kind of an operatic voice, like a Nelson Eddy voice, played Santa Claus. And we played for these, it must have been 100 kids, and who were either blind from birth or through the war. And the bombing in Great Britain and England it never stopped, with the bus bombs flying over, and we would be in a little town somewhere, and we would go out and do a show. When we came back to the town, it was gone, devastated, in flames. Anyway, we did the show for the kids, and I'll never forget us on the stage, and we didn't know exactly how to handle this. These were these beautiful little blind children in the audience, and they were so anxious to be entertained. The only thing we could do really was we did a few jokes for them, and we did the band, the music, and the singing, and they loved that. And I remember Bernie, one of the comics, starting out, "Hi, boys and girls," and they all yelled, and he said, "Why does a fireman wear red suspenders?" And there was a deathly still in the audience. And we wondered why, until one of the teachers said, "Braces." And then we realized it's not suspenders in England, it's braces. So then Bernie said, "Why do the firemen wear red braces?" And then the kids all yelled, "To keep his trousers up." And they loved it. Anyway, we did a lot of fun. And then at the end of the performance, the kids all marched up on stage, and they each grabbed our hand, and they sang for us. And I'll never forget this. I still get choked up when I think about it. They sang "When the Lights Go On Again" all over the world. And here was the sweet little kids, blind kids in England. So it was a performance I'll never forget. And also in England, we did a Royal Command performance again for the firemen. And it was an annual event in England done at Royal Albert Hall. Now, Royal Albert Hall is like the Metropolitan Opera House. It holds like 10,000 people. It was huge. And we were on the bill with the Russian, that's where you probably thought about. Yeah, the Russian ballet and the Polish Army Choir, and all the performers who were in England at that time. And there were some big performers there that did their act, and the Sky Blazers. We were the only Americans on the bill. And they had on a big billboard in the front of the theater, they had the American Sky Blazes, because that's how they put it, Blazes instead of Blazers. But and it worked for the fire department. You know? So we did a kind of a cut down version of Hell's a Poppin' was our show. It was a very funny show.
What else did you guys do while you were in England?
Well, we played, as I said, all over England, from top to bottom. We played for everybody who was in any branch of the service. We did shows for. Those were the most memorable things that I told you about. And of course, the bombing kept going on in there. And then finally, we were all sent. Now, this is 1944 now. We're all sent to Oxford. Our group is sent to Oxford. We land in Oxford, England. We took the train to Oxford, and we got off the train, got it. They put us in a warehouse, and they billeted us there. And we thought something big is going on. And of course, it was the beginning of D-Day was about to happen. We didn't know that. And so we were all billeted there, and one morning, we were awakened by this terrible, loud buzzing, it sounded like sound. And we threw open the curtains, the blackout curtains, and there the sky was filled with airplanes, and the harbor was full of boats going over to the beaches. D-Day had begun. That night, we were all sound asleep, and we were awakened by the MPs and brought into General Brereton's office, where he informed us that he wanted his boys to be the first entertainers on the beaches. We were going to land in Omaha Beach, and he was going to fly us in there in his own private cargo plane, and we were to do our entertainment for the guys as they went in, came out of battle. Well, we didn't know whether to applaud him or or to faint. It was quite a thing to tell us we're going in. Thank God we didn't go in the first wave. And by the third day, actually we were to land on Omaha Beach. And you know what happened on the opening days of Omaha Beach? It was terrible, devastating. We finally were put into a plane on D+15, 15 days after D-Day. And on the plane, it was quite a trip over there. There were still planes in the air and ships being bombed, and we landed on an airstrip that was cut out of a cliff on Omaha Beach, and we overshot and almost went into the water when the guy pulled us out and came around and landed safely. And from then on, we performed all through France. We were in all the battles there. We went in and out of them with the troops.
Now, there was a fairly famous cartoon that was done.
Yes, there was. Actually, what happened was Malden, who was the great comedy cartoonist in those days, Bill Malden, did a cartoon of a billboard that was up that Patton had put up for his troops. As they went into battle, they were to be sure that they had their shoes shined, they had their ties on, and they were fined so much money, $2 if you didn't have your shoes shined, and so on and so on. And we came through there, and I took a picture of that sign, and then of the real sign, and then took a picture of Malden's sign, this is the one they called General Patton Old Blood and Guts. Patton was very upset about that, incidentally. So we went through that area too.
And there was another one done of Special Services landing.
Oh, when we landed on the beach, yes, there was one in Yank magazine
with the piano.
Yeah, there it is, and it was with the guys carrying our piano and drums on the beach at Omaha Beach, and saying, and the caption was, "He's with Special Services." Yeah, that's what it was. And but we did some great shows through there, and it was pretty scary. And we played for the British in Cannes, which was in the northern part, not the southern part of France. And we did a show for them, and we almost got killed in that one. The Germans were right. There was a smoke screen that we laid down. The Germans were right on the other side of the smoke screen, lobbing shells at us, and all day long. We had an old theater, a bombed-out theater, where we performed for the British troops. And they just continually bombed us. We were out on a porch of the theater one night, three of us, and watching the ships with their cannons going. It looked like the shells looked like bicycles as they would roll over and then hit somebody on the other side. All of a sudden, the German planes came in. And we looked up, and right in front of us were the German bombers strafing and dropping bombs, and then they set off flares, which lit the place up. So we all hit the deck, the cement porch, and I wanted to crawl under it. And right in front of us, one of the Bofor guns hit a German plane, and it exploded in front of us. We could see the charred body of the pilot go into the drink. And but he landed maybe 200, 300 yards from us, and that was the scariest thing of all. If he'd gotten through, we might have been all killed on that one. So that was quite a terrible experience.
Just to hop back for a second, back to England when you were talking about the buzz bombs.
Yes.
You actually got a photograph of one.
Yes, I do. And it was from my hotel window. And the buzz bombs were these strange little unmanned bombs, if you will. They were like little airplanes that flew over. The Germans flew them over, and when they stopped, that horrible loud buzzing sound that the motors made, then you knew you were in for it, because wherever the buzzing stopped, that's where the bomb dropped and exploded. And right out of my hotel window, I could see the buzz bomb go over, hear the loud buzz, and all of a sudden stop. And I knew I was away from where it would land, but I watched it, the bomb hit and explode, and I don't know if it killed anybody or what, but that went on all the time in England. Mm-hmm. And as I say, The buzz bomb was just part of it. The V2, I think it was called, rocket, was another one of the weapons that the Germans had. And that was another devastating piece of arsenal that they had.
You also had a photograph in there of one of the C-47s. Was it flying back?
Yeah.
Was it missing an engine?
Was that the one without the...
Without an engine?
The engine, yeah. We were in the water. We were doing shows, actually, on Liberty ships. And we noticed this one plane coming over our head, and it had a missing engine. And it went out a little ways out into the channel and then dove into the water and exploded. It was shot. The Nazis had shot it down. So that happened all around us. When we were in France, we were doing a show for about 2,000 troops in the field, and an American plane cracked up at the thank God not in our audience, but just behind our audience, and that stopped the show.
Let's talk just a little bit about what the Liberty ships were.
Well, the Liberty ships were these small vessels that the Merchant Marine ran. And they were actually, they would move cargo in and out, foodstuffs, whatever that was needed. And they were built rather quickly by our builders of the fleet. And the only way to get up on these things, we would take an LSD over to a Liberty ship with all our props and costumes and instruments, and have to climb a Jacobson ladder to get. And if you've ever done that, that's really quite a feat, with the sea moving under you and the boat moving this way, and you reach up and try to grab a rope ladder and get yourself up on the ship. And then we hauled our props and costumes up after us, and then we would do shows for the guys, the crew on board the Liberty ships. It was quite a deal. So that was another one of our great experiences. We played 3 or 4 of the Liberty ships that were in the harbor.
Now, in your treatment,
yeah,
you talk about General Eisenhower. Was that just part of the story on that one? Or
no, the General Eisenhower bit was very funny. I've got to tell you that. We were in France now, and we're playing. There's, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 people out in the field, soldiers, and we're up on a stage, a makeshift stage, doing our thing. And one of the bits that we did, in those days there was no stand-up comedy, if you will. It were bits and sketches, comedy bits and sketches. And one of the sketches that we did was an old burlesque bit called Buzzin' the Bee. And I won't go into it, but it has to do with us spraying water on each other. And it winds up with us running off to the wings and getting seltzer bottles, coming back on stage and asking the guys in the audience if they did you like the game? It was called a game. And they would all yell out, yes. And then we say, would you like to play the game? And they'd all yell, yes. And then we'd squirt the audience with these seltzer bottles. Well, we were doing a show. We were getting ready to get on stage when all of a sudden sirens went off. And here is a convoy of cars coming in with flags waving on the fenders and generals' stars on it. And Eisenhower got out. And they put him in the front row with his entourage. And General Eisenhower was in the front row, and we all thought, oh boy, this is going to be fun. So we did the show, and everything was going smoothly, and then it came time for the Buzzin' the Bee part of the show. And we, 3 of us comics, we were in the wings, and we said, what'll we do? And one of the guys said, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't do the Buzzin', the finale part of the Buzzin', the punchline. And we all looked at each other and said, why not? What's he going to do, fire us? So we decided to do it. Now we're on one side of the stage in a wing, and the other side our lieutenant is standing. And he has an idea of what's going through our mind, and he isn't too happy about it. He's trying to get our attention. Don't do it, he's yelling from the wings. We pay no attention to him. We do the Buzzin' the Bee bit. It's going over funny. We're getting a lot of laughs. We run off to the wings, get the seltzer bottles behind. We come out. Did you like the game? Everybody yells, yes. Would you like to play? Yes. We take the seltzer bottles out and squirt Eisenhower. All 3 of us. Soaked him. And then we stood back and waited. He didn't say a word. And we thought, oh my God, we're in trouble now. He turns around and starts to laugh and applauds. Well, everybody applauded then. And then I came out in front of the guys and I said, you were a real sport, General Eisenhower. We really appreciate what you did. And as a matter of fact, the Sky Blazers, we'd like to all thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And General Eisenhower would like to thank you from his bottom, too. Lieutenant, oh no, what have you done? Well, he started to laugh again, thank God, and all the troops laughed and they applauded. And so he was quite a sport. But that was quite a day. So the day that we sprayed the general.
Just as a thought, what other high profile?
Well, we did a show for Patton, and nothing unusual happened there. We played...
Did anybody get fined?
Huh?
Did you get fined?
We got fined and slapped in the face a couple of times, but we didn't spray him. We were scared of Patton. We didn't know how he'd react to that. But we did... basically, that was it. We did the troops there, basically. And then I forgot to tell you, talking about going backwards, back to North Africa, a very famous person joined our troop, a USO guy who came over, a guy by the name of Jack Benny. And Jack Benny came over, he joined our troop because we had the band. And also, he had who was the harmonica player? Larry Adler was with him, and the famous harmonica player. And they did quite a show. Now, Jack Benny refused to do the show if any of the officers took the front seats in the field to watch us. He made them all get in the back, and he refused to do the show until the enlisted men came and sat in the front. And Jack was another terrific USO guy. He refused to take any money. He paid his way all the way. He was a wonderful guy and a tremendous performer, a very funny guy. And it was a real pleasure to do a show with Jack Benny. I learned so much from him. That was one of the things. Then in France, B.B. Daniels and Ben Lyons were the big performers in England at that time. They're both Americans, but they were both movie stars. In fact, Ben Lyons in the 30s was in Wings. I guess that was in the 20s, in the famous movie Wings that won an Academy Award, the first Academy Award, I think. And his wife, B.B., was a performer. And when we were in England, they had us over at their town, their brownstone house in London. We became very close friends. And B.B. at that time was in Panama Hattie, a traveling show through England. And later they became, after the war, a husband and wife team on radio. And they did their radio show for many years, and they were loved by the British and the Americans too. So they actually played. Oh, and then another group, you wouldn't remember. They were called the Yacht Club Boys. And if you remember the movies in the 30s, the Yacht Club Boys were like the Ritz Brothers. 4 guys, comedy team, made records. They were kind of second-rate comics, but they had their big thing with a movie they made and a radio show they did, and they also joined our troupe because we had a band and could supply them with a foundation for their entertainment unit.
Well, they probably also wanted to learn from them.
Of course they wanted to learn from us. We were young performers, and I tell you, we thought we owned the world. And I thought I was pretty smart. And I was in rehearsal with the Yacht Club Boys, who were in the business for a long time. They were in vaudeville before that. And at one of the rehearsals, I had I made the mistake of trying to tell the lead guy how to do his act, and he really told me off in no uncertain terms, and said, "Kid, when you have enough experience behind you, you can tell me how to do my bit. Until then, just knock it off." And I never forgot that. And that's when it hit me that, I'm a young performer. I'm supposed to learn from the older guys, not teach them how to do their business. They were the ones that taught me how to do the business. And that stayed with me for the rest of my entertainment career.
Along that idea of having been young, owning the world and everything else,
Yeah.
there was a time when you decided to not be enlisted and to to be a lieutenant for a while.
Oh. Well, not really. But what happened was we were in North Africa now. We had just landed in Tripoli. And my buddy Duke and I, always the rebels, decided we were not going to stay with the guys at the Red Cross Club, where they billeted us, the rest of the guys. We were going to go off on our own and stay at the El Mahari, I think was the hotel, the finest hotel in Tripoli. And the only way we could get in was to pose as officers. Well, we weren't dressed like enlisted men. We wore nothing that resembled enlisted men's outfits. We looked like we could have been officers. So we made our way into the front desk and we told the guy, I'm Lieutenant Jacobson and this is Lieutenant Davidson and we'd like a room for the night. And the guy gave us a room, so we posed as officers. And of course he told us that Rommel, who had just been kicked out of Tripoli, we were staying in the room that Rommel had. Well, of course, Duke and I are sitting having our drinks in the hotel room one night saying, I'll bet he tells that to everybody who checks into every room in this hotel. That's the room that Rommel stayed in. It was quite a story. But that's the time we posed as lieutenants, yes.
Now, you had a lot of commanders.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel Hinchcliffe, was it?
Hinchcliffe was he was the guy who was, he was the guy that was the head of our outfit from the beginning on the ship. And General Brereton had put him in charge of us. His name was Leroy C. Hinchcliffe. And I don't think I'm supposed to say this, but the C stood for chicken, four-letter word. We thought. That's what we called him behind his back. Yeah, Leroy Hinchcliffe was quite a guy. He actually stayed in Cairo or wherever we went out into the field. He never came with us, thank goodness. And as a matter of fact, when we were in France, we were awarded the Bronze Star Medal for what we had done for the morale of the troops. So Hinchcliffe was to come in. This was when we were in Cannes, at the English place that I told you about, the theater, where the Germans were, and was going to present us with our medal. And as he drove in his Jeep, a truck in front of him hit a landmine and exploded in front of him. Well, he took one look at that, landed where we were, threw the medals to our lieutenant, got back in the Jeep, and headed away from the place. So that's how we were awarded our medals. Colonel C went by his name, all right. And but we were awarded the Bronze Star Medal. So.
Along that same line, you had some sergeants.
We went overseas with a beautiful man, First Sergeant Bates. He was the first sergeant of our outfit. And Bates was, at that time, 65 years old. He was an old Army man, and he refused to get, he shouldn't have gone overseas with us, but they allowed him to do that. Sergeant threw a big party for us, for all us guys in the 9th Air Force, before we left for overseas. And Duke had introduced me to the wonderful woman that would become my wife. And we decided we were going to get married at that point. This is back in Dayton now, and decided to wait because the Americans are in the war now. It's going to be over in a couple of months. I'll be home, and then we can get married then. So we decided not to get married. But anyway, Sergeant Bates at the big party got loaded and said to everybody that was there, I'm going to take you over, my men, and I'm going to bring you back. Well, Sergeant Bates never made it home. He had a huge heart attack and died before he could be sent home. But he was a terrific man. And we were all, of course, all sergeants, but Sergeant Bates I have a real soft spot in my heart for, because he was such a super guy. He loved my wife, Doris, future wife at that time, and she always gave him a big kiss, and he always blushed, this old blustery first sergeant. And that was Bates. All right, we are now, D-Day has happened and we have played all through France. It's now getting close to Christmas of 1944. And we've been overseas for a long, long time at this point. And all of a sudden we got our orders to report to a place in Belgium, an anti-aircraft outfit, and the outfits that were in Belgium at the point, in Liège and Antwerp and Brussels, and do shows at that area. It's freezing cold. And by the time we got there, it was middle of December, and the whole bunch of us, we did shows for the ACAC, the anti-aircraft groups, and we're deep in Belgium now, and suddenly the guys are all really discontent at this point. We've been overseas for years. We hadn't had any leave of absences. The only leave we took actually was in Paris, when at the liberation of Paris, when we went in there and we went AWOL for a month and lived like civilians there, because we had it up to here. They never gave us time off. We worked 7 days a week doing shows, 3-4 a day, and then traveling. Did one show every day for years. So finally, and there's a very funny story I want to tell you about that happened in France. But should I tell you that now? All right. It was cold, another cold night, and we're playing a bomb group somewhere in France, and we're freezing to death. So we got together after the show and decided, you know what, these are bomber groups. I'll bet you they've got bomb jackets, these fleece-lined leather coats. Maybe we ought to steal some. So on the way out of the camp, we waited till everybody was asleep, and we went back and broke into the supply hut, Quonset hut. And there we found boxes of what we thought were the jackets. We loaded them onto our bus and took off. We got a few miles away from the camp, and we stopped the bus, and we're freezing. Open the boxes. So we opened the boxes. The first box opened, and out came a pair of pants. Fleece-lined leather pants. The next box, pants. There were no jackets. They were all trousers. So that was not really worthwhile stealing. But it was really a very, very ridiculous thing that we had done. But we were freezing to death. And we went every winter we went through this thing of being cold. In the summer we were hot. But now we're back in the ACAC group in Belgium. The guys all decided we're going to take off again. So we lost the toss, and my buddy Tex and me got to stay with the equipment at the camp while the rest of the guys took off for all over the world. Some of them went to Paris, some of them went to England, and here we were stuck with the truck and the bus. And now it's December 16th, and we wake up one morning, snow 2 feet deep, freezing cold. We're going to the mess hall when all of a sudden a convoy comes through, all shot to hell. Guys are dead in the trucks and in the cars and in the jeeps, and the Battle of the Bulge had started, and we're caught in the middle of it. And so the colonel who was in charge of the ACAC group said, "I'm sorry, but you're going to be detained here." We couldn't leave, obviously, and he said, "Incidentally, you got orders to report back to Chantilly, France. You're going to get your discharge and go home." And what are we going to do? We can't get out of this place. And there we were for a couple of days, right in the middle of this bloodiest battle in World War II. And thank God we got out of it. We decided Tex would drive the bus, I would drive the truck, and we would go back to Chantilly and hope that the rest of the guys would form up and meet us there. And they did, after a long period of time. And we finally, in the next February, got to go home and our discharge.
So Jack, throughout your tour when you were in England, North Africa, Egypt,
right,
France, Belgium, what was the largest audience that you guys ever played to?
I guess the largest audience would have been at Royal Albert Hall, where they were estimated to be 10,000 people. And it's kind of a frightening thing, even as a performer. It was fun, but it still gets you on edge when you think you're performing for 10,000 people in front of you, British, and you wonder how your gags are going to go. Well, the jokes went well, the show went terrific, we got a standing ovation, but the first laugh I got, my part was as a drunk, sitting in a box seat, and there were tiers of boxes in Royal Albert Hall. And we had to talk from there to the stage. And my line, I forget what my line was, but I had a comedy line with our MC on the stage, and then he would fire a line back, and then I would hit a punchline and act like a drunk. And the first laugh that came out of the mouths of 10,000 people pushed me back in my seat. It was really something, that wild laugh, to hear that volume hit you. I happened to be in Lady Dumas' box. She allowed me to sit in there and do the bit from there, and she was quite a gal. And when I got through, she congratulated me on all of us on our performance, and said, "I now knight you, Sir Jake." And she hit me on the shoulder with her fingers, and so I'm Sir. You can call me Sir Jake from now on. And the smallest audience, is that what you were going to ask me? I had a feeling. The smallest audience was somewhere in North Africa, where there was no audience except for one guy. He was the only one there in a tent. Everybody else was out in the field somewhere. So we decided to do a show for a one-man audience, and we did. And I think there's a picture of that somewhere, too. So that was the largest and the smallest group.
Did you all get back together before you got your discharge papers? Or how did that work?
Well,
because you were supposed to go to Chantilly, France.
Yeah, we went to Chantilly. We all got to. Yes, we all did get back together again, and we all got together in Chantilly. That's the place, incidentally, where the racetrack is, the famous racetrack. We were billeted in the stalls, in the horse stalls. That's where we slept. Yes, we all got together, and then they sent us back. We didn't get our discharge at that point. What they did was send us back to the States. They broke us up into parts of the country. When we landed, we all landed in Boston in February of 1945. And at that point, everybody from the East Coast went to Atlantic City for R&R, and then everybody from the West Coast went wherever they were sent. So the Sky Blazers at that point was split apart. And there were about 5 of us that remained, 5 or 6 of us that remained. We were sent to finally, after our rest and relaxation for a couple of weeks in Atlantic City, all the food we wanted to eat, all the milk we wanted to drink, all the, just had a great time. We were finally sent to a rehabilitation hospital camp, Camp Davis in Cape Fear. Is that north or south? I think south, North Carolina. And there we joined up with other special service units that were back. And one of them was who later became a very famous writer and producer, Arnie Sultan, who was my best friend then. And after the war, we remained good friends. Arnie Sultan was later in civilian life the writer and producer of Barney Miller's show, and Get Smart, and He and She, the early days of television, and the Judy Garland show, one of the Judy Garland shows. He became a huge writer and producer. And then by that time, I was in television, and we would meet each year in Los Angeles. I was with the ABC affiliate in Tucson, and also in Phoenix, Arizona. I was manager there. And we would meet there and have dinner, and then we'd go to the ABC meetings, because Barney Miller was an ABC show. And there, suddenly, we realized that this big, huge producer, one of the best in the business, Aaron Spelling, was with our troupe in North Carolina. And I looked at a picture, and I said, wait a minute, that's Aaron Spelling. But he had signed it Jerry Spelling. We found out later that he took the name Aaron because I guess it sounded a lot better than Jerry. It was a little frivolous, see. But we told Aaron, and I gave him his picture, and he said, that's me. I was with you guys. So he's actually one of the straight men with another show that had joined our troupe. When we were with the hospital, our job there was to do a show each week, a new musical comedy show each week for the troops that would come back for rehabilitation in the hospital. So we did that. We played for, I played for, with the Winged Victory show, which was another Air Force show. So we did a lot of shows there. And then finally, we got our discharge. And then I could go back and marry the woman of my dreams, which I did. And we remained happily married for 42 years. And unfortunately, she passed away. It's been about 15, 16 years ago now. And I've had a big career in television. And also, I am now an author of several books that I've had published, and that's what I'm doing now.
There was a photo in there. There's photos in there of you and of your wife, and there's one of you that the King's photographer took.
Yeah, it was the King's photographer. We're in England now, and the King's photographer, we were sent to do publicity photos, and he did a very funny one of me that's there with holding a light bulb and crazy. And then he decided, he said, you know, you look like Leslie Howard, the British actor who was in Gone with the Wind. And he said, I would like to pose you that way. And he gave me a pipe to hold, and he posed me and took this picture. And my wife loved the picture. So that's what that crazy picture is of me looking very much like Leslie Howard when I was about 23 years old. Yeah.
But have you never smoked a pipe?
I never smoked a pipe. Smoked cigarettes, but not a pipe. Yeah.
Just to kind of wrap up,
Yeah.
what we've kind of been talking about. Tell me a little bit about each of the guys that was in the band, in the group with you.
Sure. What happened was we got the group together, and Duke and I were listened to the auditions. We put a call out to the 9th Air Force. This was in Cairo when we were told to do the show. Incidentally, the general gave us the penthouse at the Grand Hotel in downtown Cairo, which was a pretty good deal. We interviewed and auditioned a whole bunch of performers. We picked, for me, I auditioned the comics mostly. I picked two guys. One guy was Harry Burney, who was a funny guy from New York. I was also a dancer, a terrific dancer. In fact, he introduced Begin to Begin in the show Jubilee in New York on Broadway. So he was a dancer and a comic. We picked him. And I also picked a guy, Jack Wolf, from Chicago, who was a very funny guy. Looked like a Shakespearean actor. We did a lot of very funny bits with him. And the guys in the band we had, of all things, an accordionist, and I'll tell you why we chose him. We had an accordion player, but Duke, trumpet. We had a guy by the name of Panici, who did saxophone and clarinet. Terrific jazz pianist, Bob, I've forgotten his name now, but Bob was our pianist. We had let's see, a bass man, not the sergeant that wanted to play bass. We had a real bass man, a stand-up bass. And who else? We had 6 guys in the band. Did I name 6 guys? Oh, and a guitar man, right. Tex, who was a terrific jazz guitarist. Now, the reason we picked Smitty, who was our accordion player, and Duke, this was over his objections. I said, look, Duke, we want to break up the band into acts that we could use. So Tex, being from Texas, played guitar. He and Smitty got together with another voice and the bass man, and they did all the old Western tunes. Cool Water, and all the Sons of the Pioneers stuff. And so we had that kind of band. We had, in those days, it wasn't country Western. It was either Western music or hillbilly music. So we had that part of the show in there. We had the jazz part. Oh, and then we had singers. We had Offord was our Sinatra crooner type singer, and then Alston Townley was our big operatic. He did the Nelson Eddy stuff. I can't even think of the kind of stuff, but the kind of semi-operatic kind of stuff. And then we had another piano man, who was a real flashy pianist, who played for Townley when he did the classical stuff. So we had everything pretty well covered. We had comedy, we had country western, we had jazz, we had crooners, we had operatic stuff, and that made up the show. Those were the guys that made up the show. So this then is my story. You know, much has been written about the civilian performers who entertained the troops in World War II, members of the USO, but incredible as it may seem, no credit has ever been given to the singers, dancers, musicians, and funny men who performed overseas as members of the Armed Forces Special Service Entertainment Units. These unsung heroes in uniform were constantly in combat situations, not sheltered from the fray in the rear lines. These entertainers took their shows where the action was the heaviest and came up with the grins, guffaws, and music that boosted the spirits and morale of the fighting men around the world.